welcome to Bear in Mind. I'm your host, Chancellor Bob Berdahl. We're coming to you from our television studio at the University of California, Berkeley, where we're joined by a small audience of students, faculty, and staff. Bear in Mind, which also appears on the UC Berkeley website, is a monthly conversation with some of the most interesting and informed people here at Berkeley. On this edition, we'll be talking to Natalie Coughlin, Berkeley senior and Olympic swimming hopeful, Christina Maslak, Vice Provost of Undergraduate Education, and Henry Brady, political science professor. So stay tuned for this edition of Bear in Mind. Our first guest is Cal's most celebrated athlete, swimmer Natalie Coughlin. A fourth-year psychology major, Natalie owns 17 U.S. records, 5 world records, and 9 NCAA titles. She's become so famous that young swimmers make pilgrimages to the Speaker Pool in order to catch a glimpse of her training. Natalie, welcome to Bear in Mind.
Thank you.
Tell me, how long have you been swimming? When did you start swimming?
I've been swimming pretty much my whole life, but I didn't join a swim team until first grade. So I was about 6 years old or so, but okay. I was moving towns and to meet new people, I just joined the local swim team. So you kind of waited until you had gotten older before
you actually joined a team?
Yes, that's actually about the age when people join.
Is that right?
4, 5, 6, and you're stuck for life.
Well, tell us about what it takes to be a swimmer. What's the most important characteristic?
Well, the ability to endure the endless hours of training is number one, and that's how you'll get through, from 6 to 21 is to be able to endure those hours. But from there, it's, love of the sport, passion. I think one of the things that I'm best at is I'm very passionate about the sport, and so I'm able to focus in practice, and I love it, and that's the only way you could really do it is if you really love it.
You said endless hours. When does your day start?
I wake up about 5:30, and I'm in the water by 6, out of the water at 7:45, and then back at practice at 1:30, and then I'm leaving about 4:30. So, and in between then I eat and go to school and study.
How do you find time to study? You're a psychology major, and how do you find time, that's a rigorous major, how do you find time to do that?
Well, it's hard, but I've been swimming ever since I was 6, so throughout my life I've dealt with managing my time and being efficient with how I study. But it's really not that difficult. You find little periods in the day when you could study, and it somehow works out. Things just happen to work out.
Does being a psychology major help you in any way in terms of getting your thoughts and your emotions and so forth under control, or is that simply quite separate?
I think what you're getting at is mental toughness, and I think mental toughness is something that you have to learn through experience. It's very hard to pick up a book and learn about it. And I think through the 15-plus years I've been doing this, I think that's how I've learned it. But, psychology I find incredibly fascinating, and I think that's why I'm able to do it, is because it's easy to study for, because I just enjoy it.
Now, you hold quite a number of records, including, I think, 5 world records. What did you feel when you broke your first world record, and has it become so routine now that it's ordinary for you?
Well, it's definitely not routine, but my first world record was, I think it was the 200 backstroke short course meters in New York a couple years ago, and Terry McKeever, my coach, said that, you should go 203, and I think the record was 205 or so. And I didn't really believe her. We never do short course meters. It's not really a format you do in the U.S., but the rest of the world does that. We normally do short course yards. But I just swam really well and touched the wall and was shocked. And, you know, it was incredibly exciting. And then the next day I got the 100 backstroke, which I was hoping to get.
What led you to select Cal? I mean, we're very proud and pleased that you did, but what caused you to choose Cal?
Well, being a native Californian, I am incredibly biased, and I love California. I think it's the best state. So I didn't want to leave, and where I was looking was UCLA, Stanford, and Cal. And after my recruiting trips, after visiting the swim teams, I just felt that I really liked Berkeley. I really liked the swim team, and I felt very comfortable with the swim team. It wasn't about who was the better team or anything like that. It was where I felt most comfortable.
And are you glad you chose Cal?
Oh, of course. I love Berkeley, and I really believe it's the best school there is.
What do you see? You're a senior this year. What comes next for you? Will you continue swimming for some period of time?
Yeah, I'll be swimming probably another 5 years or so. And sometime I'll graduate. I'm not sure exactly when that's going to be with Olympics coming up.
Right.
My schedule's going to be a little mixed up. But yeah, just continue swimming and wherever it takes me. If I'm lucky, somehow I'll be able to make a career out of swimming and through the people I meet and you know,
Well, tell us what a
sports.
career in swimming would mean for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years after.
Well, for 5 or
college.
you know, you get sponsorships and just through endorsements, and you survive. And you do end up making a little bit of money. It's nothing like NFL or anything like that, or NBA. Oh my God! But you can make a living out of it, and I would love to do that. That's one of the biggest blessings is being able to do what you love and making a living out of it. So,
Longer term, what do you see as a potential career?
well, I just love sports so much, and they've been a part of my life, you know, for 16 years. I'm only 21, so it's going to be really hard for me to leave that arena. And I really like media relations, and so something with sports and media, whether it be broadcasting or something else, something in that.
Well, you've already had quite a bit of experience before cameras and being interviewed and so forth, so it would be quite natural for you to move into some kind of a media job, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
That's great.
So.
We're going to be looking for you in the Olympics through all of the meets this coming year. You've really made us very proud, and we're really very glad to claim you as one of our Cal athletes. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie Coughlin. Our next guest is Christina Maslak, who is Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education here at Berkeley. Christina is renowned for her study of job burnout, how people get burned out on their jobs. But she's also renowned for a number of other things. She's won UC Berkeley's Distinguished Teaching Award. She is the Case Professor of the Year. She is the Carnegie Foundation Professor of the Year. She has many honors as a teacher, and we're delighted to have you with us today, Christina. Welcome to Bear in Mind.
Well, thank you.
Now, you tell us what you see the job of Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education. This is a new job that's been created in the last several years,
That's right.
and how do you see that job?
I think the most important aspect of this job is to really be an advocate for undergraduates to the Chancellor, to the Cabinet, to make sure that issues that affect undergraduate education are really front and center. And secondly, I think this job is, the goal of the job is to really focus on the campus as a whole. Undergraduate education takes place in many colleges and schools and departments, but there's really a need to look broadly, what are all the opportunities that we provide for our students, and are we doing the very best? And in that sense, I think the Vice Provost has that special responsibility.
Well, Berkeley is well known as a great research university. It's well known for its graduate programs. Like all big public universities, we're frequently criticized for not paying enough attention to undergraduate education. Right. Is that a fair criticism?
I think in general it's been the kind of criticism that does come up. I mean, sort of undergraduate education is number two rather than number one in this kind of a research context. But what we've been doing here at Berkeley is really trying to level that playing field so that it's as much a number one kind of priority, because it is part and integrated into our research mission. And so we've been working really hard not only in involving our undergraduates and giving them a very special education that taps into the research greatness of the campus, but we've worked really hard on making teaching as important for faculty as the research. And I'm really pleased to say that when we survey our undergraduates, like we did this spring, had over about half of the undergraduate class answer, we asked them about the quality of teaching and the kind of educational experience. We found out that the vast majority of students, up in the 80%, were saying that the quality of the teaching was really good. And it goes against the stereotype that you often hear about: big classes, impersonal, don't pay attention. And yet, the students are telling us that they're really getting very good value and a wonderful education here. They like the quality of the teaching. In our large undergraduate classes, we have a lot of our most distinguished teaching award faculty leading those classes, bringing in new innovations, finding new ways to involve students in the kind of excitement and discovery of research. So I think the stereotype, the criticism, is probably not as true as it may have been.
Can you give us some examples of how involving students in research is taking place on the campus? How are some of the undergraduates actually getting involved in research?
Well, there's a lot of different routes for that. One of them is the Undergraduate Research Apprentice Program, or URAP, and basically what that does is pair up undergraduates with faculty. So faculty indicate what kind of research projects they have going, how many research assistants or research apprentices they'd like, and then the program matches up students to that. And they take it for credit at first, but many of those undergraduates continue working voluntarily because they get involved in the research project. Breaking up students into teams who work on their projects and use multimedia techniques. So there's just a whole different kind of interaction that goes on in the class as the students are learning and working. What we're trying to do, I think, is deal with not only the basic question of how best do students learn, and are there better models than just the sort of the passive kind of lecture, but also dealing with the fact that we have not enough large lecture rooms on campus. We don't always have enough GSIs to provide the sections and the labs. We have technology now, which allows us to do some really innovative things. And so all of that is coming up into sort of an interesting mix. So for example, we received a grant from Hewlett-Packard to put in wireless all around campus so that it's not just upgrading that aspect, that you can be sitting not just in free speech, but in the EdPsych library or
When you say free speech, you mean the cafe?
Free speech cafe, yes. But that's one of the attractions there is the wireless, and you can have your little laptop and be able to connect into all sorts of things.
So you can connect to the internet anywhere on campus with,
right,
the wireless connection.
The internet, the library, and your fellow students. And so part of the grant is actually funding some new experiments in statistics, anthropology, chemistry, where students, in a sense, are continuing their learning and doing things together all kinds of places in different kinds of ways. And I'm really looking forward to that.
So technology is changing a lot of what we do in the large classroom?
It can. It doesn't have to. But it's, technology is sort of in the service of the pedagogy, and so it's really what the faculty and the GSIs, what they're trying to accomplish, and what sorts of technology help them get there. And so we try and provide options and choices to get them thinking about what is it you're trying to accomplish here in the class? But it can be low-tech, like colored chalk, and it can be high-tech, like all kinds of other things. What are the tools, the best tools, to allow you to really engage students? And that's a challenge in a large class, lectures can still do it. I mean, we know incredible lectures that get standing ovations after each one that they give. So I'm not trying to knock it, but I'm also saying that there are other ways in which we can do it. Yeah.
We just went through the Western Association of Schools and Colleges accreditation that happens about every decade.
That's right.
And that was just completed, I know, yesterday. What did you learn from that?
Wow.
We focused on undergraduate education.
It focused
and I
on
know that we learned, first of all, we're going to be reaccredited, which is always...
I don't think that was in doubt.
That wasn't much in doubt.
That really wasn't the reason we were doing this at some level. But yeah, 10 years ago, I think the review team had said, getting back to your earlier point, that somehow you're a wonderful top research university, your graduate education is wonderful, et cetera, et cetera. You're not really paying attention to undergraduate education. So this time, it's really what have we been doing in the 10 years to address that. And I think a a lot of people thought that we might still get criticized of, you know, the usual, we're too big, we're impersonal, et cetera. The most wonderful and in a way surprising thing was how surprised the team was at what we were doing. And they were getting this not because of just what we wrote and prepared, but they came and they spoke to students and they spoke to faculty and they spoke to staff and they spoke to administrators and were really impressed with the kinds of things that we're doing on this campus. I think their concerns are more on how we're going to sustain it, how we're going to keep this momentum going. But I basically heard that message of, you know, you should be tooting your horn a little bit and not being quite as modest about undergraduate education as we sometimes are.
Well, modesty isn't always what we're known for.
I know.
And, so it's good to have that acknowledged. But much of the leadership in undergraduate education is due to your contribution, Christina, and we're very grateful to you for that.
Well,
thank you for being on Bear in Mind.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Political science professor Henry Brady is an expert on voting systems and issues. During this recent recall election, Professor Brady testified in the 9th District Court of Appeals on the validity of punch card ballots and became a much-quoted expert during that recall election. Welcome to Bear in Mind.
Good to be here.
Tell us a little bit about that election. What was your impression of the voice of the voters? What were the voters trying to tell our government in the course of that election?
I think we had some voters who were very angry at Gray Davis. They felt that a lot of the problems in California were due to his lack of leadership. I think the truth is he wasn't a great leader. There's no sort of memorable phrase we can all remember from the Gray Davis years. I think there's some concern I have here that people are blaming Gray Davis for problems that are structural problems in California. But whatever, they certainly were angry and they certainly decided to make a change.
Do you think that's a general phenomenon or unique to California? There's some speculation that it's just sort of throw the bums out as an anti-incumbent expression that may translate into the next year's national election. Is that possible?
Well, it is possible. I mean, I think that when people see problems, they look to their leadership and they say, has this person been leading? And when they don't see that, they get angry. One of the things we've learned as political scientists is we used to think that reason was really what motivated voters, but more and more we realize that emotions are incredibly important and that we have to understand better how emotions come out and how people make decisions based upon emotions.
Well, is that surprising to you, that emotions, since most of the television ads that I've seen that are so carefully crafted don't necessarily appeal to reason so much as they do emotion? So,
well, in political science, we've gone through different stages. At one point in the 30s, we thought propaganda was really important, so emotions were at the forefront and central to political science. And then as things sort of calmed down in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we started to become more and more focused upon reason and rational voters, and there's a whole spate of books on that topic. But this kind of election, I think, brings us back to the classic concerns with emotions and how people get mad about things and how propaganda, if you want to call it that, or just advertisements, can sway people. Arnold Schwarzenegger had very simple nostrums that he presented to the people of California, very simple models of how government works, but that sold.
As a political scientist and an expert on creating survey instruments, we know that politicians do a great deal of polling. Has that polling changed the way in which elections are taking place? And is it an effort really to get at what the emotional issues are that will drive voters? What is democracy being served by that kind of polling?
Well, I think there's probably too much polling in some ways now. As a guy who does polling, I'm a little hesitant to say that since my livelihood to some extent depends upon it. I run the Survey Research Center here. But I think sometimes there's too much focus on polls, especially by the news media, actually. If you look at the last election, there was tremendous focus on who's ahead, who's behind, and not enough emphasis upon the issues. I was very upset about the fact that time and again, I thought there were debates and there were other circumstances where the media did not pin these candidates down on the central issue in the campaign, which was, we got a budget deficit in California. There's only one way to solve budget deficits. You either increase taxes or you cut programs. What, Mr. Schwarzenegger or Mr. Davis, are you going to do about that? It's a very simple, straightforward question. It wasn't asked enough.
Why do you think the media is reticent to really drive home those critical kinds of issues and give the voters a chance to hear what people will really say on the hard issues?
Well, I think there's two things. First, I think they think people aren't interested in that, and they think that the horse race is more interesting, that people like to sort of talk about who's ahead and who's behind. But I think there's a second reason as well. The news media feels uncomfortable when they get to issues. They think they can understand who's ahead and who's behind, and they have polling to sort of help them get at some of that. When they get to issues, they get nervous because they feel that if they're not careful, it'll look like they're taking a position on the issues. And so they just feel less happy talking about those kinds of things, and therefore they don't.
So they focus on personalities?
I think a lot of it is, yes, focusing on personality. And of course, this election was tailor-made for that. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a larger-than-life personality. And in fact, a lot of the coverage, there's a study just done by Bruce Fuller here at this university, which shows that the news media focused almost all of its attention on Arnold Schwarzenegger and almost all of its attention on his personality and very little on his issue positions.
Now, you spent a good deal of time in Florida during the recount, I guess, as it is referred to in Florida, and learned a lot about punch card voting in that process. Tell us about the reservations that you certainly developed, and we all, I guess, developed with all of the talk about hanging chads and the like.
Well, I went to Florida in 2000, and I was concerned actually about the butterfly ballot there, which was a bad ballot design, but I also looked at the recount. But it was actually a third thing that's really engaged my attention over the last few years, and I've done studies on, and that is I realized there's bad ballot design, there's problems with recounts, but there's a third problem, which is we have voting systems which don't even record the votes properly, and that's the problem with punch cards. Again and again, I've shown through my research that when you take a county that uses punch cards and you change to one of the newer technologies, either electronic ATM-style systems or optical scan, which is sort of like a standardized test, and when you move to those new systems, suddenly the number of people who appear not to vote goes down. Now, election officials will tell you, oh, what's happening here is these are people who are intentionally coming to the polls and deciding not to vote. My argument is that's true for some people, but it's hard to believe that in the recall election, that 1 in 11 people came to the polls in Los Angeles County and decided not to vote on the recall question. So I'm arguing that a lot of those people really came to the polls, tried to vote, did their best thing to vote with the machine that was there, and nevertheless did not have their vote recorded.
Because of the mechanics of counting
Because of the
those
mechanics,
votes?
not counting, recording. The trouble with punch cards is there's nothing else in life we do like using a punch card. We use ATM machines, which are like electronic voting systems, so we understand those systems. We use optical scan systems when we fill out standardized tests. There's nothing else we do in life that's like a punch card. Second of all, the punch card systems, for those of you who voted with them, you know that you take a little stylus and you push it through a little teeny hole. And when you do that, you're supposed to push out the chad on the ballot. You can't see whether you've actually accomplished that task when you do it. So with the electronic system, when you push a button, you can see it light up and it says you voted for that person. With the optical scan, there's a name of a candidate and you fill in the bubble and you know you voted for that person. With the punch card system, you've pushed through and you don't know whether you've pushed through the CHAD or not. And I think, therefore, it's very easy to have the machine not operate properly. You think it has, and therefore your vote's not recorded.
How many were not recorded?
My estimate is in this last election that there were probably 176,000 lost votes, which is close to 2% of the total number of people who voted. So if we'd had an election that was within 2% on any of the 4 questions, it seems to me people would have been back in court complaining about punch card systems. I'm happy that, frankly, the margins were much bigger than that.
It's hard to believe that people would make the effort of going to the polls and then decide not to vote once they got there.
It doesn't pass the sort of common sense test of why we go to the polls. Most of us don't get there and say, gee, you know, I don't know why I came and I'm not going to vote.
There have been some questions that have been raised about the electronic ATM type system in terms of security, in terms of easy manipulation of it and its results. Are you confident that that system is secure and will not be tampered with?
I think we have to be worried about all of our voting systems. One thing everybody should know is that all votes in California, and in fact almost all votes in the country, are counted by computers. So if we're worried about computers being hackable and malfunctioning because of bad programming, we've got to be worried about punch cards and optical scan and electronic systems. It's only when we hand count ballots that we don't use computers, and almost nobody does that anymore. So that's the first thing to understand. The second thing is that some people want a paper trail for electronic systems because they say if there's some evidence of a problem, then we have that paper trail. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's good to have redundancy. There's already a lot of redundancy built into those systems. So we really have to ask, is it worth the extra money to add a printer to each one of those machines and to have the paper trail? And we have to also remember, even the classic paper ballots could be defrauded by people stuffing ballot boxes. So the first and most important thing about this is to realize we have to be vigilant about every kind of system.
Well, this is undoubtedly going to be an issue that will continue to be talked about in the course of the 2004 election. Are you confident that we won't have another Florida situation in 2004?
Well, the good news is that I've been working with people to try to get rid of punch cards in California, and we have an agreement that by March 1st, punch cards will be gone. So I'm very happy about that.
How about the rest of the country?
The rest of the country has not made that decision yet. There are still places like Illinois and Ohio that have punch cards in place and will still be using them. And that worries me because I think these are antiquated systems and it's probably time to go on to better systems.
It's entirely possible that we'll have a very close election again.
It certainly seems possible. It's hard to know, but George W. Bush looked like he was flying high in the polls, but of course the problems in Iraq, problems with the economy are making it more and more difficult to believe that he's going to have an easy time of it in 2004.
Well, thank you, Professor Brady,
it's good to be here.
very much. That was Professor Henry Brady, Professor of Political Science here at UC Berkeley.